US-Turkey ties hit crisis mode after a series of arrests by Turkish authorities and the suspension of visas by both sides. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Ali Mustafa and this is Strait Talk. A once flourishing relationship built on decades-long military alliance is going through a difficult time. A string of arrests by Turkish authorities has led to the US suspending visa services at its consulates and embassy in Turkey. Ankara followed suit with similar measures, leaving a big question mark on what happens next. Ömer Kablan reports from Istanbul.
Her şeyden önce biz bir kabile değiliz. Bir kabile devleti de değiliz.
Anger at the US for suspending non-immigrant visa services for Turkish citizens. But in a tit-for-tat move, Turkey retaliated against the Americans. The dispute broke out over the arrest of Metin Topuz, a local employee at the US consulate in Istanbul since 1994. He's alleged to have helped FETÖ members escape to the US after last year's failed coup in Turkey. And Turkish officials say they have evidence that he has been in touch with over 100 FETÖ members, including a former state prosecutor, Zekeriya Öz, who is currently on the run. On any other day, there would be lines of people waiting to go inside. But as US-Turkish relations hit their lowest point since US consulate workers were arrested with suspected links to the FETÖ terror group, this building will continue to stay deserted. Turkey says that detainment is part of a judicial process and that the accused does not hold diplomatic immunity.
We can't predict how long it will take to resolve this matter. The duration will be a function of ongoing discussions between our two governments about the reasons for the detention of our local staff members.
Topuz denied the charges against him, but he revealed to authorities that he was suspicious of his colleague Mete Canturk of having ties to the terror group. Mete was later called in for questioning, but he's alleged to be hiding in the US consulate in Istanbul.
Amerika'nın burada bir defa bir şeyi değerlendirmesi lazım. Bu ajanlar Amerikan Başkonsolosluğu'na nasıl sızdı?
US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson called his Turkish counterpart, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, to express concerns on the issue. And a delegation from Washington will visit Ankara next week to find mutual ground. The NATO allies want to resolve the tensions as swiftly as possible. Ömer Kablan, Strait Talk.
And to discuss this issue further, I'm joined in the studio by Matthew Breiser. He's the former US ambassador to Azerbaijan. Now, as a former top diplomat to a Central Asian country, would you have taken such an extreme measure as the current US ambassador to Turkey has taken?
I wouldn't. Well, if you mean the visa cutoff, I actually think that was a decision taken by Washington and probably approved by the White House. But either way, no, I would never have taken this decision. In my 23 years as a diplomat, I never even thought of or ever heard anyone contemplate using visas as a political weapon.
Now, the statement coming out of Washington was that this was a measure taken in consultation between Ambassador Bass, the State Department, and the White House. So there is no dysfunction in the decision-making process in the U.S., and according to you?
I think there's great dysfunction. I've never seen anything like it in U.S. foreign policy, to be honest. My guess, I don't know what happened, but my guess is Ambassador Bass, whom I've known, worked very closely with for 15 years, maybe didn't like this idea of using this tool, this tactic. But I sense that maybe someone who's more ideological, politically ideological, in the White House said, we got to be tougher. I mean, remember on Saturday, President Trump said about Rex Tillerson, we have a good relationship, I just wish he was tougher sometimes. So I think Tillerson took that to heart.
On September 21st, we have the US President Donald Trump giving the Turkish President very high marks, and I quote, "So what has changed from September 21st to now?"
Well, I think it goes back to the word you rightfully used. It's continuous dysfunctionality. And, you know, President Trump at that time, during that same interview or that same moment, said U.S.-Turkey relations have never been this good. Clearly, they've never been this bad. So I think that President Trump simply didn't understand what he was saying, didn't understand the depth of discord between the U.S. and Turkey, and most fundamentally, doesn't comprehend that for Turks, July 15th was a real coup. It doesn't matter which part of the political spectrum you're on in Turkey. That was a real coup that was traumatic for Turkey. And in Washington, I think they're still digesting that this is a reality.
And one of the elements tied to that failed coup is Fethullah Gulen,
Yes.
the man Turkey says is responsible, who is living in a self-imposed exile in the U.S. state of Pennsylvania. Tell us how Gulen and his network have become a source of discord between the U.S. and Turkey.
Yeah, that's the most fundamental problem in the relationship now. And just to start off with my response, I'd say if the shoe were on the other foot, if there was the head of a terrorist organization or an organization considered by the U.S. government to be terrorist that had just participated in a coup attempt, living here in Turkey, and an American, and Turkey refused to extradite him, you can imagine the United States would be going crazy and would probably be talking about sanctions against Turkey. So how this happened or how the United States is not able to extradite Gulen, that's a complicated issue in terms of U.S. law. A judge has to take a decision to extradite. But I think Washington could do a much better job in making it clear that it is taking some steps. It's calling him in for questioning, Gulen, could be describing to Turkey some of the actions I think that U.S. law enforcement is undertaking to try to figure
out. And not canceling visas?
No, first and foremost, not canceling visas. Look, if this gentleman at the U.S. Embassy was accused or is accused by the Turkish government of having been working with the Gulenist organization in conjunction with a coup attempt, and the response by the U.S. government, without explanation, is simply to say, no, you have no right to prosecute this man. Why? Because he works for the United States mission? Many Turks have no choice but to interpret that as some sort of a recognition by the U.S. that perhaps it was behind the coup attempt, which I know it wasn't. But what are Turks supposed to think?
So where do you go from here then?
I think things are starting to get a bit better. And I think, to be honest, that it was Prime Minister Yildirim's statement 2 days ago that got things moving in a better direction, where he said, it's not right just to do these sorts of moves unilaterally. We need to talk behind closed doors. I recall President Erdogan also said about the same time, a couple days ago, that Minister Çavuşoğlu wasn't even consulted before the U.S. took this action. So where things go from here is there need to be real discussions. Ibrahim Kalin today said there will be. And all the issues in the relationship that are causing tension need to be put on the table. And the U.S. needs to do a better job explaining what's upsetting it so much. There's a lot of innuendo, a lot of hints that maybe the United States government thinks it's being pressured by these arrests, whereas the Turkish side thinks, well, maybe the United States is trying to shelter this man who is guilty of being involved with the coup attempt. A huge amount of also dysfunctionality in the communication. If you start talking to each other quietly about these issues, I think that they can be resolved, to be honest.
So there is hope?
There is hope. There is hope.
Ambassador Breiser, thank you so much.
I thank you.
Still to come on Strait Talk. As the diplomatic rift between Turkey and the U.S. lingers on, we break down many of the turning points that sent relations downward. And was Turkey's independent foreign policy partly the reason behind the U.S. visa suspension? We take a look. The mistrust between Turkey and the United States is nowhere more evident than legal cooperation or lack thereof. For years, the U.S. has arrested Turkish nationals on often questionable charges, according to Ankara, while failing to extradite suspects back to Turkey. Aisha Jamal explains.
Just when you thought relations between Turkey and the U.S. were improving,
we have a great friendship. As countries, I think we're right now as close as we have ever been.
They suspend each other's visa services. So what's behind the spat between the two? Well, the U.S. initiated the move and Ankara retaliated after Turkey arrested this man, an employee at the US consulate in Istanbul, accusing him of espionage and links to people involved in last year's failed coup. Another man working at the consulate, Mete Canturk, has also been called in for questioning over the same allegations, but his whereabouts are unknown. These are not the only incidents at US missions in Turkey. Hamza Uluçay, a translator at the US consulate in Adana, was arrested earlier this year for having suspected links to the PKK. The US says they don't know why their consulate staff have been arrested, but Turkey's justice minister says this is a legal decision and that trying a Turkish citizen for a crime committed in Turkey is our right. There's a long history of legal disputes between the two countries. Turkey has been frustrated with the US for refusing to extradite Fethullah Gülen, the man accused of masterminding last year's failed coup. One issue often overlooked is the double standards the US applies to itself and others. Washington has long argued that it couldn't extradite Gülen because it was following its own strict legal procedures. But then it demands that Turkey release suspected criminals without those same legal procedures being taken. Meanwhile, Washington tried to get Ankara to release an American pastor accused last year of being a threat to national security. And it doesn't stop there. The two countries disagree over the case of Reza Zarrab, an Iranian-Turkish businessman who was arrested in Miami for conspiring to evade US sanctions against Iran. A year later, the deputy general manager of Halkbank, the bank used for those transactions, was also arrested in the US. Turkey's response? That the arrests are politically motivated. These incidents further strain the Turkish-American relationship, leaving ties the coldest they've been in years. So what would it take to bring back relations and trust to where they once were?
And to discuss this discord between the US and Turkey further, we join in the studio by Hakan Ocal. He's a senior political analyst and a columnist at the Daily Sabah. Now, you have written an article just recently, and the title is "My Money's on Trump." Why are you putting money on the US president, Hakan?
I mean, at one point they are going to compare the IQ tests, right?
There's a controversy of an IQ test between Donald Trump and Tillerson, Rex Tillerson.
Yeah, but that is just a joke. I mean, the president, they are not going to allow the president to be the president. At one point, if you remember, or people as old as I am will remember that there was this movement in political America that let Reagan be Reagan, or let Joe Biden be Joe Biden, kind of thing. They are not allowing president be president.
So you think the US president isn't being allowed to carry on his agenda, carry out his agenda?
No, he is not.
Who's stopping him, and what's his agenda?
Simply because even the Republicans didn't believe that he was going to be the president. And so when he was elected against all the odds and all the parties and all the political bureaucratic people, and now he is alone at the White House.
So do you think this dysfunction has to do with what's happening between the US and Turkey and the suspension of visas?
Directly so. I mean, not only the visa thing, the spat about the visa applications being stopped by the embassy or anything, but also about the Syrian policy. Imagine you are calling Turkish president, my best friend. We are getting even better friends every day. When he was visiting New York last month, and then his government, his country, his army is arming and providing military material to the person, to the group.
You're talking about the YPG.
YPG and all other derivatives of PKK, with arms and everything. How can president, a U.S. president, can call a Turkish president my good friend and still provide arms? So president is not in the control of daily implementation of U.S. foreign policy.
That sounds like a very dangerous situation.
That is very dangerous.
And this is the perspective. Do you think the leadership in Ankara knows this is going on, that there is a dysfunction?
I don't know, but that is the image they have in mind right now. I mean, even today, as we speak, the Turkish president again repeated his words that whole spot was this visa thing started by the ambassador, not the White House. White House, even as a matter of fact, a couple of days ago said that, no, they were in the loop, they knew what ambassador was doing, and they approved what he did by stopping visa applications. If that is the case, Ankara doesn't believe them. I mean, you have this ally and friend country which is not believing you. Well, it is not good relationship.
Haki Ujal, thank you so much for your insights.
Oh, I thank you for having me.
The current crisis in Turkish-American ties didn't happen overnight, according to observers. It's the culmination of years of mistrust, broken promises, and strategic differences that played out into the open. Osman Lone explains.
For decades, Turkey and the US shared a special relationship, solidified during the Cold War, being staunch NATO allies and cooperating in areas spanning from the Balkans to the Middle East, often sharing the same goals. Turkey's support in the First Gulf War was incremental, with Operation Northern Watch allowing the US to enforce a no-fly zone from Incirlik Air Base near the southern city of Adana. But during the Second Gulf War, the relationship took a turn for the worst. The Turkish National Assembly took a critical vote and denied US troops passage through their sovereign land to attack Iraq. The US resented this decision. A sense of US coldness began to emerge towards the rising AK Party and then Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Newly elected US President Barack Obama tried to change this and warmed up to the Turkish leader. The Turkish parliament agreed to extend its military support with the NATO-led mission sending troops to Afghanistan. The relationship was peaking and President Erdogan was invited to the White House, being called a friend by President Obama. But by then, the Syrian conflict was well underway, and the cracks were starting to show. Both countries were fighting against the regime with joint military support. Then a chemical attack was launched by Assad's forces in East Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus. Obama's very public red line had been crossed.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
Obama asked for approval from Congress to attack Syria, but failed, instead making a decision that would trigger a downfall of events, directly funding and supplying arms to terrorist groups like the SDF and YPG. Tensions heightened further when an attempted coup left over 250 people dead. The evidence points to prime suspect Fethullah Gulen, a cult-like figure who heads an organization called FETÖ that infiltrated the Turkish government and military. Turkey handed over the evidence to the US and applied for the fugitive's extradition, and as of yet, it has not been accepted, leaving the strategic partnership of Turkey and America at a critical point. Osman Lone, Strait Talk.
And to discuss this further, we're joined from Ankara by Mehmet Yegin. He's an affiliate at Bilkent University in the Turkish capital. Thank you for joining us, Mehmet. Tell us clarify for us, what is Turkey's position in all of this?
Well, I think the Turkish position is to be understood by its long-term ally and to be understood about what it means for Turkey. But for now, I think that there seems to be Turkey and the US are on the different pages about how explaining how the things are going. So
you talk about Turkey and the US being on different pages. Tell us about these different expectations.
Well, I think for the Turkish part, Turkey sees a 15 July coup attempt a major issue, and also it thinks that there are people behind that and a legitimate legal procedure about that, and it expects from the US to respect that, and at least, if not, the US is assisting about it. But for the US side, it's a very different story. It thinks that the evidences are not strong, so this is a harassment of the US embassy personnel or the US citizens.
Mehmet, this is a quite a historic relationship and a long-term alliance between Turkey and the US. We've seen Turkey stand as a buffer against the Soviet Iron Curtain. Tell us historically, is there a precedence for what is happening today? Has the relationship been through a crisis like this or previous crisis before?
Relationship was not free of crisis any time, but this is a huge one, of course. But the major crisis that I can recall previously is, of course, the 2003 One March bill. That was a huge crisis between Turkey and the US, and it took likely 4 years to recover for the bilateral relationship. So it was a long-term crisis, and I hope this will not turn out to be one either.
Mehmet, given the history of the US-Turkey relationship, what is the way forward, or what is the way that you see is forward?
Well, I think that the crisis will stop at certain point, and for some time, I think there will be a silence, and then we will talk about third-party talks, or then one high-level visit to one country to another. Then I think we will go back to the basics. So I don't think this will be an end or broke in a major rift between the Turkey and US. But I think it may take some time to just heal the wounds that the crisis has caused.
Mehmet Yengin, thank you so much for joining us from Ankara. The Turkey-US visa row hasn't just affected diplomats and businessmen, common people have been affected as well, including a small village in Turkey's Black Sea region.
Burası Giresun'un Yağlıdere ilçesinin Hisarcık köyü. Ben Ali Işık. Şu anda Giresun'un 1/3'isi Amerika'da diyebiliriz. Buradaki ilk göç hikayesi o yıllarda bu çevre köylerden, bu çevreden mübadele denilen 14'lü yıllarda buralardan giden bir çocuğu, Rum çocuğunun olduğu bilinmektedir. Burada bir köyün muhtarı ona yardımcı olmuş. Amerika'ya geçtim. Amerika'da yaklaşık 40 yıl sonra geri dönmüş. Sizi Amerika'ya götüreyim. Amerika'da daha iyi şartlar var diye. 1960'lı yıllarında geri gelmesiyle, onun yardımıyla bu memleketten 3-5 diye yine bu şekillerde bu günümüze kadar hala Amerika'ya gitmekte. Ben 81'de turist olarak gittim. O zamanlarda hangi yoldan gidebiliyorsak o yolu deniyorduk. Vize alabiliyorsak vizeyle gidiyorduk. Vize alamıyorsak vizesiz gitme yollarından Kanada'dan geliyorduk, Meksika'dan geliyorduk diyelim. Her yolu deniyorduk. 300 nüfustan fazla kendi köyümüzün, Hisarcık köyünün nüfusunda 300'den fazla şey vardır. Nüfus vardır şu anda Amerika'da. Yağlıdere genelinde tam olarak bilmediğimden olarak yani 15 bin, 20 bin üzerinde şeyin olduğunu söylemekteler. Deniyor adam şimdi Yağlıdereli olmaktan sorun dosyasını açmadan geri çeviriyorlar. Sen alamazsın, seni kabul etmeyiz diye. Bu sefer adam nüfusunu değiştiriyor. Türkiye'nin hangi yerinden gelirsen gel bu Yağlıdere hikayesi var şeyde marka olarak. Marka olmuş bu şeyde. Ama ne için marka olmuş? 1970'lerde gitmiştim ben. Bu insanlar buraya işçi olarak gitmiş, çalışmak olarak gitmiş. İşçi olarak gidenler birbirlerine taşıma yapmışlar. Akrabasını taşıyabilmiş, evlilik yoluyla taşımış, para yardım etmiş, taşımış. Bu şekilde Yağlıderelilerin çoğaldığını düşünüyoruz. Türkiye'ye gidip gelmekte de, Amerika'ya gidip gelmekte de bir her şeyin yasal olmasını, kolay olmasını diliyoruz.
Allies can have differences, and the Turkish-American relationship is no exception. But what's different this time is that the row is escalating, not waning. President Erdogan even personally weighed in, digging Turkey's position further. In the past, after heads cooled, attempts were made to patch things up. And now attempts are being made, but will they matter? Turkey hasn't blamed the US administration directly, but there are others in Ankara who say the US is to blame because it hasn't been able to control the actions of one of its diplomats. The question then is the current US-Turkey spat the work of what Ankara says is a rogue diplomat, or is there something much deeper that is affecting ties between Turkey and the United States? Tell us what you think at #StraitTalk. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ali Mustafa. Until next time, take care and goodbye.